Hello, welcome to my Saturday voice. I got a cold. I'll try to keep the sniffles to a minimum. Let's push on to the top whatever number of mistakes this ends up being that people make when buying a knife. Up at the shop, we've carried 3 dozen plus knife brands over the years, 400, 500 models total. I don't know how many models. I sharpen customer knives very frequently. I see all manner of knives and knife owners come through the door, so I want to share some mistakes that I think people make. And I've seen all of these. So, first, there's a list of hard and fast, don't do it items. Okay, these rules are non-negotiable. You just don't. Number 1, Pakistani knives on eBay, Damascus usually, no. Okay, they're almost never heat treated. Believe me, I get these. People mail these to me to fix. I've checked some of them out myself. When they're Damascus, the Damascus is often peeling apart because it's not fully joined or fully forge welded. The grinds are trash. The symmetry is trash. The design is usually garbagey. They're over etched, so they're very rough. They're not even polished. The handles might be acceptable. There's some workmanship in some of these handles, but don't be fooled. These are garbage. Number 2, similarly, unbranded crap brands from China or completely unbranded knives from China or East Asia, no. The guy in Thailand who agrees to make you, yes you, your very own custom kukri based on the sketches you sent them. The word is no. It's don't. Next, the $5 knife bin at the gun show. Nope. Number 4, Frost, Case, Browning, Buck, CRKT, avoid like herpes. Number 5, anything that looks like this. All right, we got those out of the way. Now we're going to go over some more realistic mistakes that I think people make. The first is that people don't understand why they're buying a knife. And I'm going to show you 2 graphs. This is the first graph. It looks at the price of the knife related to its quality. And by quality, I mean materials, workmanship, and usefulness, okay? In general, there's a direct relationship between quality and price. Just like anywhere else, as quality goes up, price goes up. Things get a little skewed when you look at reduced manufacturing costs in Asia, but you get the idea. How much are you willing to pay for quality? Well, this assumes a couple things. First is that we know quality when we see it, and that we haven't been schnookered. This graph examines another common reason people buy a knife. It inspires them. And in inspiration, we're going to wrap up everything like sentimental value, imaginative or creative value, artistic value, collectible value. That's, for me, all under inspiration. So maybe this is just a regular knife that makes you feel good or gives you confidence, or you like the branding. You identify with Bear Grylls or something like that. Or maybe it's a completely useless life-size replica of Conan's sword that you hang on the wall in your bedroom, and provided it doesn't decapitate you in your sleep during an earthquake, it's just the neatest. So don't get me wrong. Inspiration is a very legitimate reason to buy something. We buy a lot of things based on this principle, and advertisers know it. Provided you have insight into why you're buying it, this is a great reason to buy a knife. I think people are actually willing to spend more on a knife for this reason than quality or workmanship or usefulness. And there's some reasons for that. First, most people don't know quality when they see it. It's easier to tell when something tickles their fancy. Second, we're willing to spend money on things that make us feel good, right? And we're even willing to spend more money if it'll enhance our peer group standing. Also, who can put value on something like art? You know, there are many paintings all around the world that are basically priceless, functionally have no value whatsoever. You cannot do anything with them. You couldn't even wipe your butt with them, okay? But they are literally close to priceless. Second mistake, I need a fixed blade knife. Many people who buy a fixed blade knife, and I love fixed blade knives, they are my inspiration, actually need a folder. If you're slicing food, skinning game, gutting fish, processing large pieces of wood, fine, fixed blade is your thing. We don't want slimy stuff in our folders, mechanisms, and their handles and structure just can't handle chopping or batoning. But I get way more use out of a folder around a campsite than I do a fixed blade. The number one thing I use a knife for at work and at home is opening packages, cutting up boxes, getting into packaged foods or items that my kids have that I need to open for them. all the work of a folder. Number 3, two things here. You don't need a long fixed blade for most things. If you're batoning 5 or 6 inches, you probably need. Chopping, you probably need that extra reach. At some point in that continuum, a hatchet becomes a little more functional, and a machete, if you're clearing brush, is certainly the tool of choice. The second issue here is this recent trend I've seen towards 1/4 inch thick spines and thicker, and I think that appeals to some inspirational value type of situation. But the thicker the spine, the more difficult it is to baton. The wider the angle of resistance is, it adds more weight to your gear. And in the age of modern metallurgy, I don't think it adds any toughness. Our steels today are so awesome. Once you give above 3/16 inch, in my mind, you're not really adding much in durability anymore. If you like using your knife as a pry bar, or you need some extra weight for chopping, fine, maybe these thicker tangs make sense. Wrong blade geometry. Number 4, here's some very basic grinds, and before we get into them, let's talk primarily about terminology. There are 2 bevels. First, the primary bevel, which constitutes the area between the spine and the edge. In what manner is the width of the knife reduced as you travel from the back of the knife or the spine to the edge? Looking at it from the side, how does that transition occur? That's the primary bevel. Secondary bevel is just the edge. How's it sharpened? So the most common type of primary bevel is the V grind or flat grind, like 2 flat sides of a triangle if you're looking at the knife on end. Good all-around, solid performer, by far the most common knife grind around. Hollow grinds are the next most common, and we see these typically in folders or razors. This can yield a very improved profile and remove a lot of resistance along the edge to a point. Eventually you catch up with that concavity and all that vanishes, but usually what you're cutting is sliced by then. Basically, this is ground on a wheel. You're pushing in the sides of the knife towards each other, and you leave a divot on each side, sort of. I think you can see what I'm talking about here, but it's great for slicing. Great for slicing. You reduce the amount of steel near the edge of the knife and in the middle of the knife where the concavities approach each other. So there's some fragility here, and we've seen these knives break. I've seen it. People bring these to us to return to the factory. People will chop with them for some reason. Even though they're a folder, they'll cut into something and then wiggle and put that lateral stress on the edge, and that we've just seen that lead to breaks time and time again. Here's a battle cleaver with a hollow grind. This is ridiculous. We carry it because some people asked for it, and now we just keep it around as to show people what not to buy. The chisel grind, an uncommon grind, occasionally appears on some chef knives. There's some sushi knives that have sort of a really complicated version of this grind. When I see it come through, it's usually on a wonky, low-quality knife with some, tactical implications purchased by people who don't really know much about what they're trying to do with it. In my personal opinion, it's pretty rare that I think they would have any advantage over a Scandi grind in the setting of an outdoor use knife. The secondary bevel, again, is the cutting edge, and most of these grinds are V grinds, and they're a good all-around grind. I also see convex grinds. That's my favorite. It's more durable than the V grind. The initial angle of resistance can be a little bit higher, but that drops off very quickly. The next is a Scandi grind, and I'm going to put this in the mistake category, and I know you guys will disagree, a lot of you, and that's okay. We can disagree. So this is a V grind that goes anywhere from 1/4 to maybe 1/2 inch, or maybe even 3/4 of an inch up the knife towards the spine. So from the edge of the spine, it's all one solid grind down to angle 0. Most commonly, these are found on bushcraft knives, and that's been fashionable for at least several years now in America. And except on knives that have a very low thickness, like 1/8 or less, I think these are overrated. I don't think they're very effective. I don't do a lot of bushcrafting, but I do some, and I think a convex grind does just as well. The issue here also is sharpening these. Unless you're sharpening the entire surface of that Scandi grind back to 0 on both sides to keep them even, you are putting a micro bevel on your Scandi grind. That's okay, but that's not a Scandi grind. You now have a saber grind with a micro bevel on it. And hey, that could be pretty effective, sort of, I don't know. At any rate, I'm just not a Scandi guy, so I know that's going to make some of you guys mad, and I apologize. So watch this demo of some slicing with some different grinds. Here's an SE with a flat grind and a V grind. It's a 4-inch blade. And here's a Bark River 4-inch blade, same width, same thickness. It has a full flat grind on the side, but an Appleseed or convex edge. Yep, laser sharp. Here's some different Scandi grinds. All of these are razor, hair popping, sharp. A couple of these knives are pretty thin, but you can see that they just don't do what a convex grind does. And I know it's not for cutting rope. That's not why you use a bushcraft knife, but I think you sort of get the picture of what I'm talking about. Number 5, I need a coating, duh. Well, coatings would have been on my just don't ever do it list, except for some recent advances in diamond light coatings. Listen, I'm going to tell you an industry secret. There's only 2 reasons a knife actually comes with a coating from the manufacturer's standpoint. Number 1, they want to appeal to your inner commando. And number 2, it's a non-stainless steel. Knives spend several years in the retail chain, bouncing from truck to warehouse to truck to warehouse to warehouse, different humidities, and no one wants to deal with returns for rust. So they put coatings on their knives. They don't have to deal with the returns. The vendor doesn't have to deal with returns. The customer gets a knife they think looks pretty cool. That's the truth. Coatings add variable levels of thickness depending on the coating. The SE has a pretty thick coating. It's a tough coating, but it detracts from the blade geometry. These knives do not baton as easily as the naked ones. Coatings wear off. They're not permanent. You know, if you are actually using your knife in a hard use manner, these things will get marked up fairly quickly. Now, DLC coatings are only microns thick, and they actually reduce the coefficient of friction on blades. So they actually make the blades slicker. They add about $25 to $50 to the cost of the knife, so they're fairly expensive. I can support a DLC type coating. They still scratch off. They're not perfect. I've tested these. I've made a few knives and sent them off for DLC coatings. They're decent, but they're still going to scratch. Number 6, I need a super steel. In general, the concept of super steel refers to these steels that are highly engineered over the past couple decades, employ powder metallurgy or some similar process to refine the grain structure, give it a pure structure, less impurities. They usually have a higher degree of vanadium and alloys than standard steels. Some of them even substitute carbon for nitrogen and things like that. They're usually stainless. They have a highly prescribed and complex heat treatment cycle. Can't be accomplished outside of a heat treat oven. You don't get the full benefit of the steel without a cryo treatment. And that's primarily what drives the cost for these steels being implemented in knives. So personally, I don't have anything against these steels. I think in the right setting, they're great. There's nothing wrong with the edge retention of conventional steel that's done as long as it's done correctly. There's nothing wrong with it. They're more difficult to sharpen, the super steels. They take longer. They're more difficult to implement in mass production. I sharpen these steels frequently on customer knives. Not all of them are done right. Some of them are pretty crappy. Now it's time for the good stuff. Let's get into some specific brands that I like. Some I like, some I don't. Mora, in my opinion. Their Sandvik steel is great for the price range. Don't be doped into buying a $90 Mora. Their $12 and $15 models are fantastic. They're razor sharp. They're very utilitarian, and if you drop it and never see it again, it was only 12 bucks. Very good knife. Condor, another winner. Not a very popular knife, but they make very nice machetes, top of the line machetes. Their fixed blades favor function over form. In fact, the fit and finish here is pretty rough, but the price is, it can't be beat. The edges are a little bit toothy. I think most people want to refine the edge a little bit, but these are great knives, and they are not built to appease to your aesthetic sensibilities. They're built to function. That's how they're all designed. Gerber gets a big meh from me. I used to appreciate them as a value play based on everything else that came in the box and around the sheath and things like that. But their recent steel, like the HC steel, has really bummed me out. It's sort of a low performing steel in the price range, and they've had a lot of design failures over the years. My parents own some Fiskars yard equipment. It's all crap. Their multi-tools used to be good, but I think their quality is sort of average right now. So they have below average edge retention. You know, they are very durable and they look nice, and the sheaths usually come with good sheaths, but I think there are better options. Cold Steel, I hate everything about this company. They have some of the worst knife blade designs, like some of the worst. They put out a huge catalog, and some of the stuff is utter garbage. But in the end, they're the company responsible for the Voyager line of folders, one of the all-time greatest folding knives ever made, in my opinion, and several respectable fixed blades for the money. So strictly on a value play, if you pick the right model, I think Cold Steel is plenty acceptable. Spyderco, I hate the looks of these knives. They're a little thumb loop, but I own one and I use it frequently. They are thin little cutting machines with these full wide flat grinds and narrow tangs on their folders, which makes them excellent for cutting and slicing. No one experiments with more steels and carries a wider range of affordability than Spyderco that I know of, which is really interesting. So if you can handle the aesthetics, I say go for a lower priced model. Zero tolerance, buttery smooth out of the box, all of them, period, all of them. I don't know why they make assist open knives. They don't need assist open knives. These things open themselves without assistance. You know, I wouldn't spend the money for an assist model on a zero tolerance if you're getting one. You just don't need the help. They've updated their look recently. They've added some smaller profile knives than years past, thankfully, but I still don't care for the aesthetics all that much. The QC is better than most knives that we carry, though. We see very few defects in the zero tolerance. A popular knife, I think a well-deserved thumbs up. Felniven, classic designs, convex edges. Not much not to like. I don't trust their bolsters, but their handles are the best in the business, the Thermaron handles. Bark River. We've seen some quality control issues with bad batches of epoxy and soft blades, but they always fix their mistakes, no questions asked. It does usually take 4 to 6 weeks, but they always fix them. So we have started checking all these, getting them out of the box and looking at them, and that saves our customers and us even some heartache. When they go off without a hitch, these are the best functioning blade geometries in production knives available, in my opinion. The edges are a little thin on their choppers, so keep that in mind. If you throw one in the dirt, it's gonna ding up. But I own one. I wouldn't trade it for anything. They're expensive, but money to performance is there. Their A2 is great. Their A2 steel is great. You don't have to spend more money on a super steel in one of these knives to get good performance. SE, very popular. They're sharpened pry bars, and that's not a compliment. If you get one, I recommend no coating. They're very tough, and for a US made knife, they're pretty reasonable. Medford, popular at one time, tended to have large and clunky designs. They're starting to close them up a little bit, but I don't really care for them, to be honest. They're quality made, they have excellent service, but the price is just too high for me. This is a pure inspirational buy. Kaiser and Wee knives, surprisingly good for coming out of China, worth the money, and fairly interesting textures and designs that are likely to provide some inspirational value. H&B Forge, highest value axes, handmade axes that we found. These things are awesome. Wetterlings, great. They gave up their U.S. distributor, so I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of customer support for warranty or service issues in the U.S. right now, but we've never had any complaints. Their axes are terrific. Boker, another big meh for me. I think they're a potentially strong player if their European and South American made knives were about 25% less expensive, but the demand at our store for these is basically zero. TRC, or Tricius knives. They make some small fixed blades that are very popular, similar size and profile to Felniven with quality steel. Spines are rounded. That's not going to appeal to anyone using magnesium or ferrocium rods, but I like these. All right, guys, lots more knives to cover, lots of different angles, lots of different mistakes, but these are the ones I can come up with right now. What do you think?